Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Brains Need Fuel, a podcast that will help you increase your overall knowledge while touching upon all the different career paths that are offered to you after graduation. Today, I have a special guest, Corina. I had a chance to meet her last week, actually. I was with a couple of friends. We went to visit the greenhouse at Nipissing University, and she welcomed us into her anatomy class, and we learned a lot of interesting stuff, and I told her I wanted her on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Yeah.
You're okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Good. So my first question to you would be, what inspired you to become an anatomy teacher, and how did you develop that interest for biology and anatomy?
So I'll start with the how did I develop the interest. I think one of the things that has always interested me is just nature, life, animals, bugs. I used to be a little kid that really enjoyed earthworms and all sorts of different living structures around me. And so then as I went through high school, you're constantly, pushed toward a career path, and I just really liked biology. I tended to like it. Sometimes not so much, depending on who my teacher was. Yeah. But then I applied to an undergrad in biology at Laurentian, and there was a chemistry focus to it. And I think it was more, your aspect of what inspired me to become an anatomy teacher. Teaching was never something I was going to do. That wasn't my career path. I actually wasn't really even sure what I was going to do, really. Like, I was just going through with my cohort of students, like everyone else is. You apply to university. At that time, there was a grade 13. And so you apply into something that at least you were good at, you had good marks in. And I think the inspiration and the passion came from the professors that were in front of me, the professors that actually brought to life certain concepts that I had never really thought about. I didn't know. All of a sudden, my world opened up. I got interested in what that the heart was made up of individual cells, that cells made up tissues, that the tissues were cellular, then were made from small molecules that I couldn't see. So it was just this aspect of the sciences, or at least of biology, that I found really interesting. So that's where the passion came in. And then I finished grad school, so I continued on with my biology courses, with my science courses. I did relatively well. I wasn't sure again, what was I going to do when I graduated? I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that I was good in the sciences. Was I going to, go into medicine? Was I going to physiotherapy? What was I going to do? So I was a little bit, even in third and fourth year, I was a little bit lost. I knew that I was good in the sciences, but then what, And so I took a position with a professor that was new from Switzerland at Laurentian, and he worked with plants outside and anatomy. He worked with the structure of cells, but not in humans, in the structure of cells in plants. And so from my I was constantly in the summers doing research on animal cells with a bunch of my professors over the 4 years of an undergrad. So it was an interesting kind of balance. Then I was like, isn't that interesting? These are similar to this. And then it just kind of morphed. And then, I finished grad school, and as part of grad school, you are asked to teach or to assist in teaching certain courses. Yeah. And it was cool. I thought, okay, it was interesting. I would spend all night trying to learn a topic that I was going to teach, 5 minutes of the next day. And it was neat to see the interest when you could get some information across. So then that was a minute that it was like, that's neat. Yeah. Right. But then what do? Do you apply to anatomy teachers, so I just took one opportunity and another opportunity, and then eventually this position came up, and here I am, right?
I think it's really interesting, like even how you said how other professor can be an inspiration to you, just like the way they teach, it can just give you like a blueprint to how to do it, like how to connect with other students while you're teaching also. So that's good that you had like professor that could help you with that, and like in different topics too.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key to, sometimes you hear people saying, oh my goodness, I hated history or I hated biology, right? And it's like, did you really hate biology? I'll just stick to the biologies. Or was it somebody who didn't really, who was asked to teach it and that wasn't their background? They're the historian asked to teach biology on that particular year. And then, so then that passion, that drive that they didn't have they had it for, World War II, but not so much for cells, right? Exactly. And so I think that's the spark, the catalyst that now, puts a seed in a student's head to say, that's interesting. That's a cool connection. I never thought of that. I've never talked about that or whatever.
Yeah. For sure. I know that it's amazing to see how anatomy has evolved over time. Is there some interest or new studies that have emerged recently?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's, and anatomy is not so much for anatomy, maybe more for physiology. I think the anatomy, because you can physically see all the muscles, all the bones, all of the, that's physical aspect for it. But the inner workings and how they all work together is constantly changing. And as modern science moves forward, as we're trying to find answers, and I think that's what scientists are constantly doing, is trying to figure out how are, especially if you're talking about anatomy, how are we put together? What exactly is cancer? What allows cancer to grow? Once we figure out how it grows, we can actually figure out how to kill it, right? And so those kinds of things. And there's a lot of new things depending on if it's, I was reading a study the other day about irritable bowel syndrome, and they were talking about some of the junctions in the, in the small intestine and stuff like that. But something that really interests me, that I've always, I guess in the last few years, I found really interesting. I'm really interested in the old world knowledge, the ancient medicine, the ancient, medical aspect, traditional, and the new. Right? Like those two for me, I think are really, you pass down information from one generation to another, and then modern medicine comes in and then just blows it all up. And, so is that one the way? Is this one the way? I personally think that they're both the way,
because sometimes I see on internet, I see that some ancient method that they used to use are actually more beneficial than some of the things that we're using nowadays. So it's interesting to see all that knowledge, how it spread, and how people even back in the days had a lot of knowledge about medicine and stuff like that.
And just from, trial and error, and and so there's a couple of neat studies that, and I sometimes bring them into my classrooms, because I find that university students are always really stressed. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety, testing. There's a lot of, and so, a few years ago, I stumbled upon some researchers from Harvard, and they were using the MRI machine. And so these are now functional MRIs that you can actually move in and do things in. And they were looking at how meditation, which is an old Buddhist type of meditation now, how that influences the brain, and how basically the physiology, the electrical signals in the brain change based on meditation. And they were actually studying meditation on use of depression and anxiety and those kinds of things. And so I find those kinds of things really interesting, the movement of science forward, but still using the past and the knowledge of the past.
Last time I love watching documentaries, and I was watching a documentary on nutrition. So it made me realize how much that topic can be broad. I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to pursue a PhD with a nutrition focus? And what are your main areas of interest in that field?
So, I've been, I did a graduate degree. I did a master's of science. So I have that. And so then I started a career. And so at Nipissing, I teach the hands-on practical aspect of the sciences. And so for a lot of years, right. And I started a family, and, my children are growing up. And so I recently got, over the years, as I'm putting together my anatomy courses, I also teach a nutrition course. I started bringing in aspects of chemistry. At the end of the day, we're all made up of chemicals. And so I found it really interesting that, that saying, you are what you eat. Right? So then I started bringing that into my classes, because that tends to be what students, I teach from an interest perspective of what are you interested in when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, right? And so those kinds of aspects of things. And I started, I started really looking into how nutrients, how the processed foods, how healthy whole foods just really create the cells of our body, the plasma membranes, all of the structural, every cell in our body is connected, like little houses on a street are connected.
Yeah.
And so if you think of every street, that's like a blood vessel that just goes by them, and now it delivers nutrients and it picks up nutrients. And so when you consume a carrot, you're actually consuming the little tiny molecules that you will have to break down for you to build yourself up.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things is how I started teaching my courses. And so then nutrition and anatomy and chemistry and all of that is so connected, right? And so again, that's we're now moving into this era of nutrition as a relatively young science, but now we're moving into this era of, if you are exactly built of the things you're consuming, then you're also built of, say, Dorito chips, and you're also built of, fruit roll-ups or whatever, right? And so that's what I'm interested in. So for me, when I see students who are struggling to pay for bills, who are struggling to pay for rent, who are struggling to pay for food, tuition, how are you at your best in a classroom?
Yeah.
When you're living on, one red sauce can for the last month, and noodle, exactly, right? Mr. Noodle and all, nothing against them, but just, those kinds of things, right? So you tend to go for the cheapest alternative, but then the expectation is that you're at your best. Focus in class, do all your work, pay attention, and then, and then also be at your best. But this is a big 4 years of your life, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, and you also need to have your highest and best quality of nutrients. So that's the stuff that interests me so it's a focus on nutrition and cognition and your ability to learn and your ability to focus. And how do we expect students to be on their last $5? Are they going to buy a textbook, or are they going to buy tomatoes?
Yeah.
Right. And so then those are things that over the years have really, and those are from my people, my students who have now kind of, again, instilled this passion of, now I have a salary, so then I know what food to buy. But when you're on your last $5, what choices do you have, really?
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting subject, especially like me being a student athlete. I find myself like you said, like when you eat, like this produce like energy. That's how you stay focused in class and do all that extra stuff that you have to do after class. And as a student athlete, as I was saying, to be on my best when I perform, I need to eat like the right things. So at first I wasn't really eating the right things, because I think when you're young, like sometimes like you just eat anything and you still have like the energy. But as I was growing and just learning about like other professionals that play basketball, I started to take more interest into nutrition, and I actually started anti-inflammatory diet.
Yes.
So that is good. I'm still trying to learn new stuff and just try to applicate that. I want to know, can you talk a bit on how food can help us combat and prevent diseases?
Yeah. We can go back to that, that core of you are what you eat, right? So, a few years ago, and students ask this all the time, and I started actually, my nutrition course basically teaches nutrition, and then it teaches how those nutrients combine to make the body. And if you can't combine them, then how are you going to make the human body? Like what do you gotta, all the, shortcuts. You're going to have to make a shortcut. If you don't have enough of these, how are you going to make it? Right. And so I started, for so long, I was thinking about, like, how do I get this across to students? And so I was trying to explain it. I remember my daughter was very young. And so I don't know, did you play with Legos when you were little?
Yeah.
Right. And so my husband did. I wasn't a big Lego kid, but my husband did. So we had Legos everywhere. And so then, I think she was maybe in grade 4 or 5, and they were learning the cell and some molecules, and it was just very minimal. And I started kind of, she was playing Legos and we were playing. I said, imagine your whole body is only made up of, say, 10 different colors of Lego pieces. And so, carbon is red and hydrogen is yellow and oxygen is white. And imagine all that. But now you have to eat a healthy carrot. That carrot is made up of also the carbons, the hydrogens, the oxygens. So in that aspect of you building the cells that make up tissues, that makes up organisms, now you're going to, when you say to a kid or anybody, you got to get your vitamin C, right? Like, okay, I guess I'll get my vitamin C, right? But then at the molecule level, you're getting your vitamin C because you need to break down the carrot into the small building blocks of you. So it's like you're looking at a big ship made up of Lego pieces. Then you eat it, you break it down into individual pieces, and then you build you. Now you build muscle cells. Now you build, all that endurance. So the disease aspect of things, if you don't say have enough potassium, potassium high in bananas, it's high in spinach, it's high in, you don't have enough of that. Well, across the membrane, we made out, let's say, 10 different colors of Lego pieces. And so, carbon is red and hydrogen is yellow and oxygen is white. Imagine all that. But now you have to eat a healthy carrot. That carrot is made up of also the carbons, the hydrogens, the oxygens. So in that aspect of you building the cells that make up tissues, that makes up organisms, now you're going to, when you say to a kid or anybody, you got to get your vitamin C, right? Like, okay, I guess I'll get my vitamin C, right? But then at the molecule level, you're getting your vitamin C because you need to break down the carrot into the small building blocks of you. So it's like you're looking at a big ship made up of Lego pieces. Then you eat it, you break it all down into individual pieces, and then you build you. Now you build muscle cells. Now you build, all that endurance. So the disease aspect of things, if you don't say have enough potassium, potassium high in bananas, it's high in spinach, it's high, you don't have enough of that. Well, across the membranes of every one of your little organ system cells, you have to do an exchange of sodium and potassium back and forth. And so then now you get muscle cramps. Now you get, now there's other parts. You're fatigued. You can't focus well. Other things, calcium, right? Like, so now all of a sudden then the body has to rob other parts of the body for calcium because you didn't take in enough Lego pieces of the blue calcium Lego piece, right? And so it's this constant give and take that diseases come from. So you can, at this stage, we've basically figured out the nutrients that are essential to prevent diseases. But now we're really trying to figure out, chronic aspects of diseases. So, back in the day, here's a cool example of vitamin C. Back in the day, people didn't understand illnesses and diseases, and there wasn't planes. People rode on ships, right? And so they would pack everything on a ship, all the grains, barrels of all these things, and then they would travel for a year hunting, searching new land. But most of the time, you can't store lemons and oranges on a ship for a year, right? It's grains, but vitamin C comes in those concept, like those structures of whole foods rather than grains. So then there was, the disease was scurvy at that time. And we hadn't heard of scurvy for a long time, but basically it was vitamin C is essential for making connective tissue. Connective tissue is essential for making ligaments and tendons. Tendons are essential to hold bones together and everything, right? Like all your joints, your ligaments and your joints, right? So now if you don't have vitamin C, that little block of Lego, then everything else crumbles. Right? So their teeth were falling out, bloody gums. People were getting splotches all over. People were dying over nobody knew what. But somehow it was only when they would travel on these ships for so long, right? And then it was a scientist who, was, I guess, a captain of a ship or whatever. Historically, I'm not too sure, but they stopped at an island, and then just to kind of rehydrate some of the sailors or so, they found fruit trees, and they started squeezing lemon juice and orange juices and stuff, and people were coming back to consciousness, right? And so it's just like something is in this for us to prevent this, right? So then now it's known vitamin C is eliminates scurvy, right? We haven't had scurvy in a long time, right? But so the whole aspect of diseases, one of the biggest problems that we're trying to do right now is cardiovascular disease. People are dying of heart attacks, of strokes, of arteriosclerosis, right? Of now just extra extra materials that are inside the blood vessels. So how do we eliminate that? So we figured out quite a few of the nutrients of stay away from this, and you don't get this, right? Yeah.
Now that's interesting. I also had a question while you were talking. I don't know if it's really in your field of studying, but I heard about like fasting, how it can help your body like just regenerate and just help you
Right.
just like feel better and stuff like that. So I wanted to know, do you know a bit about that?
So there is a lot of intermittent fasting, and so that is, and fasting used to be done in, a lot of religious aspects, right? Like on Sundays you didn't eat, and so even my mom still, no, we don't. We only eat fish on Sundays, or we only eat, and so a lot of that stuff is it does reset your body. It resets your. It depends on for how long, right? And so, but it definitely is, there's a certain period of time that your body needs to now go into the reserves, right? And so it's good to go into the reserves that you have, say the fat reserves. If for 10 hours you're not eating anything, then you can go into the reserves and cut back from all of the excess. And in North American diets, we tend to have a lot of excess, right? Like we don't, like I don't know an excessive amount about it, but it's definitely a benefit.
For sure. Yeah, thank you. We talk a bit on nutrient. Can you talk about the role of calcium and in your body and your overall health?
Yeah. And calcium is a big one. And calcium, I think I drive calcium home continuously, and iron as well, right? To my students. And I kind of pull it through throughout a course, because sometimes I think, and I don't know, as a student, or as a human, you think calcium is good for what? What's the first thing that comes to your head? Bones, right? Like you think calcium is good for bones and teeth, right? And you're like, okay. But then just like you said a moment ago, you said when you're young, you don't really pay attention, right? Like you don't really think about it. But so then do you really think about getting enough calcium to get good bones? Like you don't, that's not really. So I kind of think the role of calcium is minimized when you say it's good for healthy bones, because people don't really, bones are there. So they're actually called silent diseases, like osteoporosis and stuff, because you don't really know that it's happening. It's just bones are deteriorating. But from my perspective, what I try to really influence it on my students and kind of keep pulling calcium through a lot of my concepts. Calcium is essential for muscles to contract. That without calcium to come into the cell, into the muscle cell, then calcium needs to kind of bind into a structure that moves. It's like a little pendulum. This calcium moves in and then moves another structure out of the way. So now, like a sliding patio door, muscles contract, right? So then they slide, that's contracting, and then they relax. And then slide. So the cells get smaller and bigger by just sliding past each other. It's called the sliding filament theory. And without calcium, nothing goes. Like, have you ever, moved the screen on a patio door and then it just jams? And you're like, what is wrong with this door, right? Without calcium, there's no contraction of muscles. Now you would think, it's biceps or triceps, right? Like whatever. But what's the most important muscle of the body? Well, yes, but the other one that actually feeds that, so that's the brain is definitely important, but the most important muscle is the heart, right? And so then we call the brain a muscle, but it's actually not a muscle. The heart is a muscle. So now it has what is called cardiac muscle that needs calcium to contract, right? Like, so everything so now contraction. Then you say the brain, you need thoughts, and you need. The brain is the one that dictates your muscles to contract by, kind of electricity, like little shocks, right, across synapses. Without calcium, you don't have those shocks. So now you don't have calcium, you don't have the shocks, you don't have muscle contraction. Well, you don't have you, right? Without the heart and without the brain, then you don't have you. There's no answer. So yes, calcium is essential for healthy teeth and healthy bones, but those will die 70 years. You can't go without, a heart attack is a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and you're done, right? Like, or brain damage, right? How much can you go without oxygen? So for me, and at least how I introduce calcium is the importance of calcium. You tend to store calcium in your bones. And so bones are also living, healthy tissues. They have to have calcium. But if you don't have enough calcium in your diet, then the body's got to get it from somewhere. It's not going to stop your heart now because you're not going to have calcium.
Yeah.
So it's going to say, well, you're going to deal with osteoporosis later on. I got to get calcium from somewhere. So it has to go to the bones to put it into the blood so that now it's readily available for the cells to contract, to, have electricity. And the thing about nutrition is really interesting, right? Like, and I tried also to actually pull sometimes the same foods, because sometimes students or humans are like, I just don't know what to eat for I don't know which to take. The darker the green and the richer the colors, the better. That's it.
I'll remember that.
So then, we talk about phosphorus and spinach. Well, calcium is also good in spinach, right? Like, and so you talk about, red peppers and green peppers and orange peppers, right? Like when you make a salad, make it colorful. Like the more color there is, if all it is chicken and mashed potatoes, that's pretty bland of a color palette, right? So think of it as an artist, like you're creating an art. Yeah. So then it's not really, I don't know what to eat. Eat food that comes out of the ground. If it comes out of the ground and you can pick it off of somewhere, it's a cucumber, it's an actual piece of lettuce. If it could have a bug and some soil on it, eat it. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that is what will have calcium in it. That will have iron in it. That's another thing too. Iron is essential for most females are anemic because they don't have enough iron, right? And so all of these are pieces of a puzzle that makes you.
Yeah.
So if you just eat the colorful foods, got it.
I remember when I visited your class, you showed us actually a shark that you dissected for one of your class, and you talk about how sharks have a cartilaginous skeleton. Can you talk a bit on the difference between that and bone skeletons?
Yeah. And so sharks and like stingrays are also in that. They have cartilaginous skeletons. And so cartilage is a lot lighter than bone is. And so cartilage is made up of different kinds of cells. And so those cells are called chondrocytes. And they, so if you're talking about, imagine like a little octopus that's pulling nutrients from your bloodstream and now creating, all these nutrients. So remember our Lego pieces. Oh, there's an orange one and there's a yellow one. And so then they're responsible for building you. So cartilage is a connective tissue, and so is bone. Bone and cartilage are both connective tissues, which means that they're made of cells, and around them, like around this octopus, non-living material like water and nutrients that isn't alive. But a cell is alive. It needs oxygen. It needs to reproduce. A cell is a living structure. So then these cells then are now creating this connective tissue that the non-living material is not hard like bone is. That is actually a solid matter. Yeah. It's actually more pliable. Okay. So all of your joints are actually lined by cartilage. Okay. And so then now you have the ability to actually bend at those joints. And so for humans or for bone skeleton, these are heavy. Like those are heavy appendages, and even your head is heavy. These are heavy, bones are heavy. So sharks, because they have a body out of cartilage, they're actually a lot more buoyant than any fish that has a bone skeleton, because they weigh more. So then they don't really need to. Usually fish that have a bone skeleton have what is called an air bladder inside of them, like a balloon that takes in air and then it allows them to go up in the water column and then down in the water column, up in the water. But sharks don't need that because they not only have that, but they have this really big liver. Like a shark's liver is huge, and it has this really oily substance. It's called squalene. It's like cooking oil. Like it's actually very oily. And again, if you're cleaning dishes, oil rises. Yeah. So now sharks are more buoyant. So now they can they move faster. They have an easier time in the water column simply because of the characteristics of what cartilage is. Okay. Much lighter and less dense than bone. But now when you move on to land, so sharks are in the water and we're on land. And so then now, of course, cartilage breaks easier. It wears away easier. In a joint, people have back problems or whatever. Now the cartilage wears away, whereas bone is more difficult to wear away. So there's pros and the cons of it, but the sharks are doing pretty good, right?
Yeah, the sharks.
Right? Like so they just have more flex and they have more buoyancy because of it.
Okay.
So,
No,
yeah.
that's interesting. I wanted to touch on that because when I actually saw the shark and everything, it was just so amazing to me. So I
Yeah.
actually wanted to talk
Yeah,
about that.
absolutely.
To go back on the nutrition, can you talk a bit on how a mother's nutrition influence her fetus? And also, how does the nutrition of an infant impact your adult life?
Okay. So, we touched a little bit ago about different aspects of research and what's
Yeah.
going on with anatomy and different, so there's, when you're talking about a mother's nutrients, so the baby, the infant, the fetus is developing inside of the mother, and there is a placenta. We're placental animals, so there's a placenta. Which a placenta, what does that really mean? It just means it's a collection of blood vessels. Part of the blood vessels come from the mom, and part comes from the baby, and they're not connected. They're not two hoses. They're actually just close enough to each other that nutrients can move from the mom to the baby blood, to the infant inside, and then back to the mom. So as this embryo goes into a fetus, calcium, phosphorus, all of the stuff that you need to build you on a daily basis, that embryo needs to actually build and build and build. And they're building massive, massive tissues and massive structures continuously. So when you're a mom that doesn't have proper nutrition, even for yourself, how are you going to build good bones, good muscles, good organs, good anything in that process? So there's a lot of research, that looks at what are referred to as teratogens, and teratogens are chemicals in the environment that impact the fetus inside. So those could be airborne, like any form of hazardous chemicals that you can smell.
Okay.
They can be, we now know ethanol, like drinking alcohol, that's a teratogen that goes into you swallow it goes into your stomach, it goes into your bloodstream, and then it goes across the placenta. So it goes from mom to baby across the placenta. So now not only are you having a glass of wine or a beer, now the fetus is having that as well, right? And so at that point, you're trying to build lung cells and you're trying to build a brain. And so then, it can't deal with ethanol. It can't deal with, street drugs. It can't even deal very well. You should limit the amount of aspirin you take and the amount of Tylenol you take, because these things, it's said that they cross the maternal infant barrier. So there's this barrier, that placental barrier. So then now you impact, then people will say, well, my mom drank and I'm fine. You don't even know what you could have been.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have no, right? Like you could have been an
You
you could have been an astroscientist, right? And now you just teach anatomy, right? And so you have no idea, right? Or, nicotine, heroin, all of these drugs, these really, or it could even be less, even prescription medication. There was a time when they used to prescribe, and I've forgotten the name of it, but they prescribed a medication when new moms felt morning sickness. Like you would now it's ginger, now because of old traditional medicine, we realize that ginger actually does a really good job, right? And so then, but they used to prescribe this medication so that people, moms weren't getting, morning sickness. And then all of a sudden, infants were born without limbs. Right. And so then that impacts now, that's how the effect that any form of nutrients has on that infant. So of course, there are going to be things in your environment that you can't control. So you can't you can't go too crazy about it. But the stuff that you can control. So then now, then the next step is, what about infant nutrition as adulthood, right? So now you've impacted this little being. Now, the baby is born, their birth date, and now, day 1, day 2, day 3. There's a lot of research that shows, and again, old world knowledge, we knew that breastfeeding babies was essential. And then we brought in formulas and we brought in other things. And there's a lot of research that looks at the difference between formula and breastfed infants. And one of the biggest, formulas have come a long way, but one of the biggest things about breastfeeding an infant is that a newborn is that you pass antibodies as the mom to the infant. So whatever environment you as a mom happen to be in, and because you're breastfeeding, you're not far from that baby, right? So that environment that now your body now produces white blood cells that are immune cells that now go and attack bacteria or pathogens or something, and because you're passing it to the baby, a newborn doesn't have an immune system. It barely can actually take care. It has a limited even digestive system because breast milk is so easily digestible. They don't really need that big. So then now not only are you protecting yourself, but you're there now. It's like their immune system is learning what to do of like, oh, I see. Okay. I'm supposed to, you're training in the process of breastfeeding, of actual, and so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of work that basically looks at the impact of a decreased obesity as an adult, or decreased blood pressure as an adult, or even decreases breastfeeding decreases the prevalence of asthma as adults, right? So there's a lot of work that actually has been now. It's like, oh, okay. Isn't this interesting, right? And so those are all now. Now there's educational programs for young moms or any mom really who just don't actually understand or don't know or whatever, based on the research that's out there of how important infant nutrition is for long-term growth and learning and education, right?
I think that's great, because if the information is accessible, then a lot of more people know, and it's just gonna help like the parents like throughout all that process when the kid is an infant, and that nutrition process. I wanted to ask, like, I had a chance, like, I've never been like allergic to anything, but I wanted to know, why are so many people like lactose intolerant?
Yeah. So you know what, like, so then that's a great question. The short answer is I don't, but the longer answer is we probably understand more now than we used to, right? And so sometimes there's mild forms of lactose intolerant. So what lactose is a sugar. It's a sugar that is found in milk. And so if you think of your digestive system as a long hose that starts at your mouth and finishes at the anus. And so this hose goes all the way through you, and you pull things across into the bloodstream from that hose. Once you break down, things are Lego pieces, right? You're constantly bringing those nutrients across. Lactose is a sugar, but it's actually a combination of two sugars. And so galactose and glucose. Glucose is what we need. Glucose is the main source of nutrient for brain cells, the main source of nutrient for red blood cells. And you can't, if you have these two Lego pieces together, you can't bring them into the bloodstream. They're too big. So then the body has to break them apart, and you can bring 1 and 2. So lactose is these two Lego pieces together. And then the cells that line your small intestine produce an enzyme that breaks them apart. So then, but if you can't produce that enzyme, then they stick together. You'll never be able to absorb them. You can't bring them into the bloodstream, right? To send them along and bring them to the red blood cells or whatever. So because of that, so now some people have mild, right? They're like, oh no, I'm not so good with cheeses. I get a lot of bad gas. I get diarrhea or whatever. And some people are really, really affected. Some people are born with it. And it just depends if the cell happens to know it's a genetic basis. It's like a chef in a kitchen who's now putting together this enzyme, and enzymes are actually proteins. And so then when they can put it together, if they can't put it together, then you don't have it. Like so then now there seems to be, again, more research is actually being done, and there seems to be it's a hereditary aspect, and there seems to be, different cultures are actually affected more than others. So Asian cultures seem to actually have a higher prevalence. Even African American cultures, they have a higher prevalence of lactose intolerance, it seems. And it's because it's genetic, it tends to be passed down from mom to baby or so. Some people can have some form of, if they have a disease like Crohn's disease or whatever, like a digestive problem, if they kind of hurt the cells that are responsible for making that enzyme, then they can get lactose intolerant as an adult. whereas they never had it when they're younger,
Yeah.
right? So I just think we just get, I don't know if there's more or we just get smarter at picking things up. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
now we just understand more. We're like, oh, that's lactose intolerant, right? And now because we understand more, now there's milk and other things with like, lactose free and whatever, right? Like now you can take a pill, which is the enzyme to break those things apart because we just understand more. We're like, okay, but then some people have a mild thing and they're like, those pills cost $39.99. I'm not buying those. I just won't eat cheese. Right? So, right. Like, so those are, yeah. So I don't know the statistics of it, if there were really, if there's more, but you're right. There's just more prevalent because now we're like, I think that every time I eat cheese, whereas in the past, my grandfather grew up on a farm. Nah, I don't eat cheese. Like, done with the cheeses or whatever, right? Like, so, those things upset my stomach. So I'm just staying away from those for what reason, who knows, right? But yeah.
Okay. I wanted to know, what advice could you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career in biology, and what are the qualities you think are essential for success in that domain?
Honestly, for what advice I would give to students to pursue in biology, I think I would probably give the same advice to all students. I really think you just keep pushing. You just keep, sometimes perseverance is key. Sometimes students get deterred by, one low mark or, too many things on the go, right? And so I think the advice is to get organized. And, when you start the class, like have an understanding or have an understanding that there's going to be a lot of things that will be due. So, find yourself a calendar, that cheap calendar from the dollar store, lay it out and put it out so that every time you look at that calendar, you're like, oh, that highlighted, yellow is coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. Right. And so that aspect of organization, I think, is key of knowing that you got to work hard for anything you do. There's no way that anything worth anything is going to come easy. It won't. Like there's nothing that's worth anything comes easy. So I think that pushing through and knowing that this is kind of your job now. So, when you go to class, it doesn't just end there. You got to go home and then also kind of tweak it when you didn't understand something. The beauty now, when I went to university, there was no internet because I'm obviously 105 years old, but there was, so then it was like you'd have to go to the library and find a book, and then you got to the book and you're like, oh, somebody took out the book. Now I don't know anything about what just happened in class, right? And so, but there's a plethora. If you're taking notes in class and you're not sure, it's always amazing of how many people don't put their hand up because they're too embarrassed, right? We appreciate that on the other side because we know, okay, we got to slow down, or I should explain that differently. It's like, take it as you're teaching me how to teach you in a way. So I think that's the advice. Just keep pushing through, and in any career, don't say no to an opportunity. If something comes up, and obviously if something comes up and you have so many things on your plate that you physically cannot do it, then okay, you're going to have to say no. But if something comes up and it's actually an opportunity that you're like, I don't know how this is gonna help me. Take it. Like, what do you got to lose by taking an opportunity, right? And so whether you know what the end goal is or not, it'll teach you something and it'll open up a new door that you didn't even know existed, right? So I think that's the thing. Sometimes students go into the sciences or social work or criminology, and they see it as such a huge thing, and they don't know how to attack it. And it's just attack it one day at a time. Like bring it in, just attack that, hand that one in, take an opportunity, go to your classes and just go to them because you paid for them. Might as well go to them, right? Like, so yeah, I think those are big things. Yeah. Right. Like, yeah.
Sure. A bit connected to that question, I wanted to ask if you could say something to your younger self, an advice, or just say something to your younger self while you were in university. What would you say to yourself?
There's a couple of things. I think I think just, to keep on going with that last statement, that I think what I've learned now at this stage of my life is that for me and for most people, I have big goals, but I got to have little goals first. I get overwhelmed with big goals. Am I going to be a heart surgeon? Am I going to be the next prime minister of Canada? Like, that's a big goal, right? Like, what's my little goal to get to that goal? So I think we just kind of have to come back in and just focus on the little things that are manageable and tangible. And every day, and I know this is cheesy, but every day you should be better than you were yesterday.
Yeah.
With whatever. Set an alarm, wake up, get your day together, and organize yourself. But I think what I would recommend to my younger self would be just to enjoy the process a little bit. But you can only enjoy the process if you're part of the process, right? Like, so some students then, some students never come to class and some students always come to class. And I think there's two sides. There's the academic side and then the social side, but both of those are connected. They have to be connected because eventually you got bills and mortgages and, like, that's just right. So right now, as hard as it seems, this is a great time, but you got to be part of it to enjoy it. You can't avoid the hard stuff because it's the hard stuff that makes you who you are. So just keep pushing through the hard stuff. You'll get to the other side.
Yeah, thank you for that advice. And especially how you say, like, enjoying the process. I feel like those last 4 or 5 years has passed so fast for me, especially because of COVID. I feel like I had my first year, it was normal. And then we went online. Then it was a bit like hybrid. And then this year was like the first normal year since my first year. So
I know.
that university experience like passed so fast. And even with basketball, just enjoying like the hard times, like sometimes going to be tough. Sometimes you're going to lose. Sometimes you're going to win, but just enjoying that process. Because now if I look back at it, like those 4 or 5 years of university just flew by.
They just fly by, right? And there was this, and I'll send it to you. There was this little, clip on Instagram, and I think it was Tom Hanks, and he was sitting around a table and he was saying, if somebody gave me a piece of advice I should have known when I was young, this little thing in my head that said, this too shall pass. So if you're at your lowest point and you just can't see it out, just know that this is going to pass. You're going to get to the other side of it. If you're at your highest point, know that this is going to pass. So enjoy the highs and the lows and know that, okay, I'll take this and keep moving, because exactly that, like, then all of a sudden you get to be 45 and you're like, what the heck just happened? How did this happen? So yeah, life is day by day. Enjoy them. Right. And I think those hard moments are, I was saying to my kid the other day, like, she was kind of struggling with different things. And I said, your life is like, imagine this moment of your time is a strand of hair, but your life is the span of this entire room. But right now, this is a strand of hair that looks so difficult, but maybe it's teaching you things for some things that you don't know yet. Maybe this is these people that you're struggling with. Maybe they're there because you got to learn how to be stronger for the next time, right? So just enjoy the process of it and work hard. Work hard. You can't get anywhere without working hard.
Yeah, thank you a lot for this podcast, this interview. It's been so great. And also, I want to give you a huge thanks because I know biology is like a hard subject for most people to understand, and just the way that you teach it and the way like you have conversation with us, even last time when we came into your class, I feel like we learned so much stuff in like such a short time. So I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thanks for this. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for stopping by my class.
Yeah.
It was great. No, absolutely. You guys teach me as much as I teach you. So I really appreciate it.
So this is done for this episode of Your Brains Need Fuel. This episode of Your Brains Need Fuel is going to be available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the platforms where you stream your podcast. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.